extreme again, so I don't know how we'll splice the two of them together, but that's okay. Let's just keep going here.
I decided to write about my maternal grandmother, and I always felt a close connection to her, and I can't say why. I just always felt. I think she was an exact opposite of my paternal grandmother. She had 28 grandchildren, and she would remember favorite foods of each child. And when you visited, she would cook your food. Everything was through food, and she was a great cook, and she was an amazing baker. And so you could just follow. She would have you, well, come on, Carrie, let's go and do this and let's do that. She just included you in her work day. And I never heard her reminisce or tell any stories except once. And she said that they had the farm paid for before Bessie arrived. Bessie was the first child, and she came a year after they were married. So it says a lot about their how they worked and paid off their bills, and could save. She went to the market every Saturday in Belleville, and that's about 25-mile ride in horse and carriage and all kinds of weather. And that's how she made her extra money. And Grandpa would take his vegetables and grain or whatever he took, and off they would go. They'd get up. When I first started talking, writing about Grandma, I realized that I didn't know much about her, and because I just remembered her as Grandma. So I started interviewing my first cousins because the aunts and uncles are all passed, and I found it very interesting that I could pick out different cousins that had a lot of the same personality traits as my grandparents. So I might find a little bit in you, and I might find a little bit in someone else, because people have the other side. They're two parents, so they're going to inherit from both sides of the family. But our oldest, Bessie's son, Jim, I just have a feeling that he is very much like our grandfather, not as harsh, but I can see a lot of similarities. And I learned so many stories from different people of things that I hadn't known, and so I have all their birth, marriage, and death beside me. And I had to do a lot of math because different things happened. And you need to know how old they were and what they were doing, and who was at home and who was off to college. And so it's a lot of work, and it becomes time consuming. And I have taken a break over Christmas.
I think we're going to have to consider winding up a little bit, but I do want to just touch. I think we're going to have another interview later on because it's fascinating. It's hard. The first interview always has to be the first conversation, always has to be kind of an overdraft. Yeah. But digging down into this a little bit is going to be wonderful. Just on this, I know we had a split, so we're 4 minutes into the second take. You have family books there. You've got a read. Other people have come before you and before me, and have done some of this work. So you've got a book there that got you started. And I want to celebrate that Karen did a family book. This is a big one, all in plastic sleeves as well, so a little thicker for that. But here is her collage cover. And all of these various pictures are people sleeping. And she says, I chose that because when I start talking genealogy, they all go to sleep on me. So it's surprising how people think they're bored. But once you can bring that to stories and tell us about Grandpa and all those stories, that brings it alive. So just as a subject, here's what happens, but when you can create the family stories, and that's what we love, that you're putting those into a book. So I'm waiting for the book when the whole book is just you and your stories, because you're published in 3 different collaborations, I think it is, right?
Yeah.
And
I've chosen the Hamilton Mountain Writers Guild is a group that was formed a few years ago, and they do anthologies for all of their writers. And I have chosen to write memoirs for those stories.
nice.
And
So that's where that's working. But it's going to be fascinating, because as you get into those stories as well, I know that it's almost like a throwback to Jane Austen's books, you know, with the Sense and Sensibilities, the Pride and Prejudice. And when we start to understand our ancestors arrived, they were educated. The women particularly were educated, all of the home care stuff. And they brought with them the porcelain cups and saucers and the tea service and so on. And they never lost that. And that was what influenced our mother to make sure that we were also very attuned to the Queen watching, or Loretta Young doing her little twirl and with her pearls on, you know. You had to be dressed for your husband to come home, and meal had to be ready for the table. It was really interesting.
Yeah, they were called the genteel poor. A lot of
genteel poor.
The genteel poor, because they had probably their good dishes were all that was left of their life in England. And a lot of the people that came to the colonies were people that everything was left to the oldest son. So everybody else, if they wanted to, they had to eke out a living somewhere, and a lot of them would come to the colonies, and that would be the governors and different people. And so when a lot of the loyalists were people like that, and they had to, they were still British, and they wanted the British law, and they weren't all British that came. There was from all different countries, but they liked the laws that had evolved.
So I'm just going to think that we need to kind of wind up here on this one. We'll chat about what we want to go into another time.
Mm-hmm.
But this has been fascinating. I love doing this style instead of an interview with question. It's a conversation as things come up between us. And you are a fascinating woman with so many skills and interests and curiosities, and I know you don't like it, but I always think of you as the matriarch of the family. Matriarch does not mean old, although we're now it, but that had nothing to do with it. The matriarch was the woman who stood on the shoulders of ancestors and understood that and cared enough to go back and understand more about how our past, our ancestries, influence us today. And it's time for us to grow up, become adults instead of little children, and recognize what our ancestors went through and how they did make their best decisions out of whatever they made, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we're strong enough to find the gratitude in that and to change. I mean, there's many times when we've said we've broken that chain. We're not doing that. We're not carrying that on to our children. That's the decisions we've made. For anything that's, and I invite others, what would be your words to the listeners about the importance of understanding our past so we can break chains of anything that we needed to change for today?
Well, we need to know our past. We need to know our roots, so we know where we're going. A lot of that is passed down through our genes, traumas, medical conditions, occupations. You get people generations of doctors, generations of nurses, generations of teachers. And it's because it's in your blood, and you've grown up, and not only just in the genes, but in your environment. So you can't divide environment and genetic, because they're so intertwined and so influence each other. It's interesting.
I think we're going to leave it right on that. That's a wonderful closing. It's just plain interesting and gives us a place to grow into.
Knowing your roots gives you a sense of identity. And that's been very important to me, because we've moved around a lot. So have you. But if you know where you've come from, you know who you are and what you can do.
And that's why we are strong, woman. Thank you, Karen. This has been wonderful. We'll connect again. Okay. Bye to everyone in Zoomland. Right?
Right.